Okay, folks, it's time for whatever month it is, May's Cafe Scientific. For tonight, we have Professor David Glew from the Leeds Sustainability Institute, who's going to talk about retrofitting, making homes fit for lower energy costs. And I don't think you're going to hear about that. So over to you, mate.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Okay, so we've all got homes, so we all want to know how to live in more sustainable homes, I guess. And we're facing energy crisis, or we hear about it a lot. So what is there to be done about it? What do we believe and what don't we believe? Perhaps is probably a good question. So I hope tonight you might get a little bit of an insight into certain things that are real, I hope, or at least kind of in the science.
Could you raise your voice slightly, please?
I can try, yeah. I might even step forward a bit maybe if the camera doesn't mind it. So I'll project a little bit more.
Right.
So we're looking at homes and how to keep them warm, essentially, is all we're really saying. So we're very aware that there's a lot of information and misinformation out there that we're going to try and dispel tonight together. So I hope you'll enjoy that. Any questions, just shout. And if what I'm talking about isn't what you want to talk about, we'll just talk about what you want to talk about. But, it sounds like there's a chance after the break anyway. So the Leeds Sustainability Institute, so I'm director of the Leeds Sustainability Institute. It's at Leeds Beckett University. We've been around for about 30 years looking at the energy performance of buildings. Nobody used to do that. Now lots of people do it, which is good for us as well. The three research themes that we have in our institute is sustainable behaviour, which is how do we make the right decisions in life? So do we choose to do the things that we kind of know we should do? Or do we not choose to do those things? And what are the reasons that stop us from doing things more sustainably? That could be anything. It doesn't have to be things in your home. It could be the travel options that you select, for instance. But what we all talk about is the energy choices perhaps that we do or don't make tonight. The second research theme is sustainable buildings, and that's going to be the focus of today's talk. It doesn't have to be old buildings that we're trying to make nice and efficient. It could be brand new buildings that are being made. So if you've got queries about that too, we can go into that. And the third final phase is sustainable urban environments. So we've had the people, the choices they make, we've had the buildings that the people sit inside, and now we've got the community and the local context in which the buildings are situated to. And that's things like air quality, urban heat islands, which you might have heard of, the impact of living near green spaces. And that really all the three things connect together. So we're looking at sustainable environments in three levels, three scales. So we're quite pleased about that. It gives us a nice holistic view of everything. But tonight we're talking about buildings, specifically homes. So I'm going to try and make the case that buildings are uniquely important in the net zero challenge. And I've got other people's data to prove that. And we'll have a little chat about that. And then the second part of the talk, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we do in the Leeds Sustainability Institute, some of the research that we do that links to the bigger challenge of net zero. Okay, so this is data from the Climate Change Commission. It's a graph to show in the future, in 2050, of all of our different sectors of the economy, which are going to have the most carbon emissions, in their opinion. And overlaid is, of course, the government's opinion as well. So the Climate Change Commission are the national body that oversee the climate budgets. They kind of encourage and set the direction for UK climate policy. And what you can see is lots of these sectors, see if this flash works. This line here is 0. And below the line is negative emissions. We can debate whether negative emissions exist. It's things like offsetting, but we'll just ignore that for the time being. So everything else is above the line. This is buildings. It's a blob because nobody knows for sure, so it's a range. The higher you are, the more emissions you have. The lower you are to the line, the lower emissions you have. So things like electricity supply, here, this is electricity at the bottom here. We can do a pretty good job, according to the Climate Change Commission, at getting us down to net zero for electricity. But for some reasons, that we'll talk about in a bit, they think buildings aren't going to have the same sorts of reduction in their carbon emissions.
When you say carbon, you mean with buildings, you mean because it's concrete and steel?
This is
Yeah, so that's obviously a big,
yeah.
both of those are big carbon users.
Yeah.
But of course then you build it and you build it right, it's there for a couple of hundred years.
No, it's a great question. So this is operational carbon emissions for buildings, because the construction industry is there too.
Yeah.
So that bit is building. So you could add those two together and it's an even worse story, but all we're going to talk about today is operational energy consumption. And there's a whole other area of research that we can talk about, which is called embodied carbon emissions. So things like, is it better to use wood or is it better to use concrete? That sort of thing. Okay. I've just pulled out two sectors of the most interest, and you can just see the progress we've made over the last few years and the potentially ambitious predictions that we've got. So electricity supply has been a phenomenal drop in carbon emissions. Well done us. Buildings have sort of wiggled around a bit. And at this point there is a colour change, if you can see it. Not everybody might be able to see it. At this point the colour change is the prediction. So they're predicting into the future. The electricity supply just sort of carries on in the curve, maybe actually tails off a little bit. So that seems to be okay. For buildings, we're sort of flatlining, and they're just anticipating that suddenly we're going to make a load of reductions. Am I in your way? Can I move a bit? Cameraman, am I allowed to move this way?
My fault for saying
I've got some people.
If everyone doesn't block.
Then I've got blocked these people here. Do I stand up?
Yes.
No, now. How about this side stand?
Yeah.
Better, a lot better, yes.
Cameraman, happy? I can point, I don't need this now. That's good. So we've got some really nice, so we've basically done nothing for the last decade in buildings. And but we need to make a reduction. So how are we going to do that?
Is that due to government policies?
Partly, yeah. Yeah, well, mostly.
The subsidies to lots of things being withdrawn.
So the question was, is it just because of government policy? Well, government policy exists to solve market failure. So the government didn't cause the market failure, but it certainly hasn't fixed it. Yeah.
You did say that line downwards for buildings is what we need to do.
Yeah.
Rather than that sort of forecast.
Yeah, so it's the government pathway.
Oh.
I would give it a different label if it were me. Okay, but we have decarbonised our economy quite a lot. And how have we done that? We've stopped using coal. So this is a graphic which just shows the coal use in the UK over time. And you don't need me to explain it because there's a lot of coal use and now there's not very much coal use. So that is a really significant change. However, there's kind of a problem with that. It makes us look really good, but all we've done is one thing that was really easy to do in the context of everything else that we've got to do. Okay, so that's the easy bit. And we've finished. You can't stop using coal. Once you've stopped using it, you're not using it anymore. But we've replaced coal, so we're using a lot more gas to produce our electricity. We're still relying on a lot of fossil fuels. But this is a graphic which shows all fuel use for making electricity. So electricity doesn't just come from coal, or it didn't just come from coal, it doesn't just come from oil, it doesn't just come from gas, it doesn't just come from nuclear, it's a combination. So over time, we've reduced our reliance on coal, but we're still using in here a lot of gas still. There's a bit of red is nuclear, which is another thing we can talk about, but perhaps not the point of this talk. And the green is renewables. So we're replacing a lot of the blue with green, and that's great, but there's still a lot of blue left, and that's the fossil fuels. But you will see we have reduced total emissions as well, so that's good too. So we are actually using less. but we're still using a lot of gas to produce our electricity. We're also using a lot of gas to heat our homes. So this is a graphic, it's a Sankey diagram if people are familiar with it. So you have a certain amount of dark blue at the end, and then all of the other dark blues added up at this end equal the dark blues at that end. If that makes sense. No. So this is your total amount of gas use, and this is who uses it at the end. Okay. So the bigger the bar, the more that sector uses of the gas. You've got a bigger chunk. So the biggest chunks of gas, power stations to make electricity, down here, it's a big chunk. And then homes, domestic. So most of our gas use is in homes, compared to all of the other stuff that we use it for. It's interestingly, we import a bit and then we export it again. I don't know why we do that, but the economics must work out for some reason.
I can tell you if you want to know.
That's fine, we'll always keep it there. Yeah, futures and markets and stuff. Okay, so we're still using gas, and that's a real problem because most of it's to heat our homes. It's really hard to just switch your heat to renewables, how we're switching our electricity to renewables. Okay, so we can continue to switch our electricity to renewables, but it's really hard to switch our heat to renewables. So this is a graph showing all of our different types of renewables that we use. So we've got biomass up here, and a bit of biogas and liquid biomass. We've got waste emissions, so like the one over in Leeds, Crossgate area, wherever that is. Then we've got offshore wind and hydro and solar, and then heat pumps. And all of the blue ones are electricity. So almost all of it is electricity. Almost all renewables is for electricity. It's really hard to do renewables to do heat with renewables. Okay. There's good reasons for that. I'll show you in a bit. So why don't we just use all of that electricity that apparently we can just turn to green to heat our homes? Surely that's just a natural thing to do. If we can make green electricity, we must be able to make green heat. We just use electric heaters. And then we come to my favourite graph of the talk, and that explains why we can't just switch over to using electricity to heat our homes. Because what this graph is showing is our annual energy consumption for gas. So it counts August, summer, winter, summer. So you've got this big spike. It's Mount Everest in the middle. Our electricity just sort of flops around a bit, like the Yorkshire Dales. Doesn't really, goes up and down a bit, but it's nowhere near the Himalayas. Okay, so we call that peak heat. So everybody in the morning, 7th of February, it's cold, turns the heating on. We use a tremendous amount of energy to heat our homes. More than 3 times the amount of available electricity. Okay, so if everybody just suddenly had electric heaters instead of gas heaters, the grid would blow up. It just couldn't do it. It just couldn't cope. Okay. So you've all heard of heat pumps, probably, for right or wrong. So the idea is you can get 3 units of heat for every 1 unit of electricity that you use. So you don't just use 1 for 1. Am I losing anybody at this point? So instead of just in here, this is all the amount of gas we use for heating. But if we heat it by heat pumps, you can essentially divide that. You can reduce the amount of total energy that you would need, because the heat pump is magic. It uses the heat, ambient heat from the environment, and condenses it into high temperature in your homes. It's just, for the purposes of the graph, it's magic. It provides 3 units of heat for 1 unit of electricity. So it seems like it's going to save the day.
Sorry, is that dotted line assuming everybody goes to heat?
This is assuming every single person in the country just suddenly woke up tomorrow morning and they had a heat pump. So you're still above the amount of electricity that we could actually generate. So alone, heat pumps can't bring down Mount Everest to the Yorkshire Dales.
And there seem to be lots of conflicting reports about how good these heat pumps actually are.
Yeah, so that's assuming it's about 3 for everyone. In reality, they run at around 2 units of heat, 2 and a bit units of heat for every 1 unit of electricity. Sometimes it's just over 1. But I'm not going to talk about heat pump efficiencies today. You can just assume, let's assume that they work like they should. It's still not good enough. Okay. So it's not they're inefficient, it's not the way that they're not underperforming that means they're not good enough. Even if they performed perfectly, they're not good enough. That's the point. Okay. So we can't bring Mount Everest down, but can we bring the Yorkshire Dales up by just generating a load more electricity? Well, it's actually very costly, very, very expensive. We don't just don't just whack a new power station on. You've got to upgrade the whole capacity of the network, of the grid. I'm about to throw onto the line a nuclear power station. So that's one nuclear power station, that green line. Did you see it go on? Yeah. So how many would we need to yank up the Yorkshire Dales, crank it up to our Mount Everest? It's just way too expensive. Even more expensive than retrofitting homes. Okay. And the government knows this. This is their main concern. This is why they want to retrofit their home, why they want you to retrofit your homes. They say it's because they want to keep you nice and warm and reduce your fuel bills, but it's because nuclear power is so expensive. Okay, so why don't we just build new efficient homes? Why can't we just all live in new energy efficient homes? Why do we have to have homes that use so much energy? So what we're going to do, I'm about to talk about the Energy Performance Certificate. Many of you will have one of these, and many of you who do have one won't know that you have one. Does everybody know what an Energy Performance Certificate is or should be, even if you don't have one?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a guess at how much energy your home uses. It's an educated guess of how much energy your home uses. Okay. This is what they look like, and you can go and look yours up, or you can look your neighbours up, or you can look up 10 Downing Street, or you can look up anybody's EPC if you want to. It's all available, it's all freely available, which you may or may not know. But yeah, basically you get this colour coding mark, like you get on your fridge or your TV. It gives you a ranking, because that's what the government thinks the level of information we need is colour coding. Okay. I do tend to agree sometimes, but anyway, let's have a look. Okay, so this is that colour coding. So the colour codes go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A is the best, and G is the worst. So they're in the colours. I hope you can see the colours. And this is where all of the homes in the country sit. This is the boxes that they fit into. My home's an E, so I'm in this box here. Most of you will be in Ds in this room. Quite a lot of you will be in Cs. There might be one or two of you in a B. Moved home recently. I'm guessing there's no A's. And there may be some sound people in an F or a G. Okay. They're the ones that look. This is a warm room for them. So that's the percentages over there. What we're going to do, and this is the number of homes, and this is everybody. So I'm going to, did it there, just to check it works. So we're going to see, well, the question I asked at the beginning of this set of slides was, why can't we all just live in nice new homes? Okay, that are just efficient anyway. So I'm going to add all of the new homes that got produced in 2021 to the graph, and you're going to see what happens. Did you see it? I'll take it off. I'll do it again. Right. So new homes are great, but they're meaningless in terms of the scale of the problem. Okay. So they're a distraction sometimes. They can sound good, they're flashy, and politicians like to say they're building lots of new efficient homes. That doesn't scratch the surface of what the major challenge is. Okay. Government have a requirement to get almost all homes to a C. There are exceptions that you can get if you live in lots of particular, peculiar, or unusual homes, which is fine, and that should exist. So currently, 60% of us are not the target that the government wants us to be at. Okay. And the interesting, I don't know if anyone picked up, why are these new homes on B? Why are they not on the A?
Building regs don't require.
That's another talk. Yeah. Okay. Fine. So we have to sort out the new homes. Right, so this is the same graph. What I'm going to do, I've outlined them in the black. Okay, I'll put a black line around them. And what's going to happen this time is, I can't remember if it's going to be the black lines are going to change or the colours are going to change. I think the black lines are going to stay the same to remind you what they were like in 2021. Okay, and then the colours are going to change to show you how successful we were in 2021 at bringing homes up to an A. Okay. That's it. So that was it before, and this is it now. So what's happened is, the other way around. So all we've done is taken a few E's and we've dumped them into C, and a few D's and dumped them into C. So the new builds aren't going to solve it, and the current approach to retrofit isn't going to touch it either. I'm trying to remember if there's a positive slide in here for you all to go over. Right, we are saving energy in homes. Some people do actually, so that's the whole country, but some people get really good help, and there has been a lot of progress. So this is a slide to show you what the government says. On average, these sorts of technologies, or these sorts of retrofits can save you, okay, on your fuel bills. Now, they're actually a lot lower, potentially, than you might have thought. So if you insulate your cavities, so you've got cavity walled home, it's uninsulated, get it insulated. Does that bring you up to a C? Does it mean it's fixed your heating problems? No, because cavity wall insulation only saves you about 9% of your fuel bill. So you've still got a lot of heat loss in going on. A new boiler will give you 5% saving. Loft insulation, 4% saving. That's because most people have already got a little bit of loft insulation. If you had 0 loft insulation, you would still save like 10% or something. Solid wall insulation, which is what I'm going to talk to later, if there's time, I'm talking too much already. We're going to talk about solid wall insulation later. Okay. That's just to show we were making progress, but we've not been making progress for the last decade because of energy prices. Okay. This is another depressing slide to show that each of these different colours is a different type of insulation, and over time, the performance of these drops. It's really obvious when you think about it. You put stuff in your loft, then you've disturbed your loft insulation. You don't clean your solar panels, they don't produce as much, so just something to look out for. This is out of date. If I updated it today, it would be out of date tomorrow. This is the cost of retrofit. So prices are just all over the place because of mainly Ukraine, I guess, but a bit of COVID too, and government policy. The paybacks I've got here are several decades. You know, the most recent research we've done is over 100 years for a lot of these. So to ask us to pay for it is a hard pill to swallow if we're only looking at cost. And there's another talk about all the other wonderful things that retrofitting your homes bring you than just fuel bill savings. This is just one of them. The NHS have identified that excess cold in homes can potentially cost almost £900 million a year. So the savings to society, if we saved it, would be 15.3 billion. So there is a very strong argument that it shouldn't be up to us to retrofit our homes. It's market failure. Okay, this is a crazy graph just to show over time all of the different numbers of retrofits that happened each year and each of the different policies that there were. So poor old industry have to navigate this policy cycle. So in 2013, they could have just said, do you know what? We're going to have a 20-year or even a 10-year long policy, which means you can invest in getting the supply chains and getting the market conditions ready to insulate homes. But they didn't do that. They said, okay, we're going to have a 2-year policy here, and then we'll have another 2-year policy, and then we'll extend it by 2 years, and then we'll switch again, we'll have another 3-year policy, and we're currently in Eco 4, which has got a 4-year policy. Every single policy has completely different rules, completely different funding structure, and they are essentially independent of each other. So there's been no continuous retrofit policy for government for over a decade. A really important thing to remind is, though, nobody cared about energy in 2013, so it's kind of our fault for not making them care. The other thing to notice is what we cared about in 2013 was fuel poverty, not net zero. So this, all of this, is fuel poverty. So the only retrofit schemes we have in the country were designed to tackle fuel poverty, not to tackle net zero. And they're very different questions and they have very different answers. So I can criticise government, but I have a little asterisk, which is a caveat. So it wasn't really their intention. Right. Is that all my talk time? How long have I got left? Because that was just the context. And I'll now talk about what I actually did. Why am I stood here? How long have I got?
Carry on.
All right, okay. It's probably a bit quick. Right, so our institute looks at these problems on a house-by-house basis. And we can help inform policy by looking at small-scale case studies and sometimes a bit larger, a couple of hundred homes perhaps. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we do across those three research themes: people, behaviour, the choices we make, the buildings themselves, and then the context environment. Okay, but this is just going to be mainly the buildings. One of the most important things that we've done and why we are Leeds Beckett, but we were up there with UCL and other people like that, who you may have heard of, even though you live in Leeds, you probably have heard of us. It's because we've identified something called the performance gap. That was only possible because of the co-heating test that we produced, which looks like this. Is an incredibly boring thing. We heat up a home. We know how warm it is. We maintain a certain temperature inside a home. We know how much energy we put in to keep that home at that certain temperature. And we keep it there for 4 weeks. And we know how cold it is outside. We know how much sunlight is hitting the room. And what we can do is a very simple energy balance with a little bit of complicated maths to get an overall average amount of energy that that house has to use to increase its temperature by 1 degree. It's as simple as that. And nobody else had done it. And now we've published guidance on the protocol to doing this test, and it is now the standard used internationally. So it's a really big deal. But we don't own it, we've given it. So everyone now references our protocol. And what that means is other people were able to verify the things that we were finding. So we did work with Joseph Rowntree and York City Council 30 years ago to say, I don't think your buildings are built properly. They don't match the designs that you've been given. You're paying for buildings that aren't delivering. So the house builders didn't listen to us for 20 years, and then eventually other people started using the tests, and now we have identified that there is a performance gap. And this is what that graph shows. So this is just a test of 32 homes, something like that. The white bars is what the house should have used. The black is the extra that it used.
Right.
So these are brand new homes. These aren't retrofitted homes. These are brand new, straight off the production line. So this chap uses more than double what it was designed to. Most of them kind of minimum 10% more than they should have done. And I guess I'm quite sympathetic to if they've got a bit of a little bit more energy use than perhaps they should do. But this is not really acceptable. Really good homes that are very careful, you might have heard of some of these, they're called passive house homes.
Mm-hmm.
They still have about a 10% overshoot. But that's fine when your absolute number is tiny. I mean, 10% of 10 pence is 1p, who cares? Whereas 10% of £5,000 is a lot a year to ask someone to pay, let alone if you're up at 50%. Okay, so that's where we came from. This is why we keep doing what we do. But we've moved beyond just that test, so we now look at how people would use heat pumps more effectively. That's another talk we can do. This is who the heck is going to buy a heat pump. That's what that project was designed to do. So these are all government funded, and some of them are industry funded. There's the logo tells you who the partners were and who the funders were. You might have heard of hydrogen heating in homes, so we've got a project looking at who would be willing to even have a hydrogen in the home. This is treescapes. This does living next to a park give you cleaner air and cooler summers. This is infrared heating. So we're testing infrared heating on behalf of government to see if it does save anybody any energy. This is a brand new home, so Barnsley Council are going to go and build 20, 30 homes. They get us in to test the first home they build so that they kind of troubleshoot all of the other problems for the rest of them. So that's kind of a good model. We look at the embodied energy of certain homes. This is a modular off-site factory. So they build the homes and they just assemble it on-site. It's all built off-site. And they think they've got a lower carbon emission overall. Similar situation here. Someone's gone and done a retrofit. They want to know if it works. So they get us in to test it. And then, and they want to do that on a national scale. The problem that we've got at the moment is lots of different people go in and check retrofits in lots of different ways, and no one can compare retrofits between Leeds and Manchester and London and Paris. Okay, so the UK Green Building Council asked us to look into how we can standardise how we assess retrofits. And this is the project I'm going to talk about today, the Deep Retrofit research project. So this is a government-funded project, £3 million, 3 universities involved, we were the lead, and we retrofitted 14 homes across Yorkshire. These are solid-walled homes, except this one, which is a non-traditional home. We put in loads of different stuff. The idea is they wanted to know what happens when you retrofit. Does it save the energy it should save, or doesn't it? Also, one of the major problems we've got with retrofitting solid-walled homes is it's so blooming expensive. Do we have to do the walls, or can we just do everything else? Because we'd much rather do that. So we looked at that as well. And one of the things we talked about as well is how do you do it in a low-risk way? And that's what this whole house approach thing means. Over the course of the last 30 or 40 years, all of our homes, they might have had double glazing, maybe, and then maybe loft insulation, maybe new doors, maybe some of us have got cavity wall insulation. But each time, only that one thing was done. And if you don't consider how the loft insulation interacts with the wall insulation, you can cause moisture problems at the junctions. Now, do we need to worry about that, or is it fine? And that's what we were looking at in this instance. So we deliberately did it wrong to see how bad it was, and then we obviously made it right. That's a video which you'll get a link to. You can see it's just us talking about the project. I'll skip it because it won't play. The sound's only on this video. It's on YouTube, so anyone can see it.
Do you have a deliberate policy on which houses you choose to do the tests?
Yeah, why wasn't it my house?
I was going to say, are they just random houses, or have they got to have certain features that you're interested in?
That's good. Yeah, good question. So we had some conditions, so it had to be empty. Our tests cost us tens of thousands of pounds, can take months and months, so nobody could live there. So that means finding a home that's void, and void is a term that landlords use when they're in between tenancies. Okay, so that was quite specific. It was really hard to find these homes. We were paying for the retrofit, we were paying their rent while we were in the building, and we were paying to check it all worked properly and give them lots of information. So we looked at social landlords and private landlords. Some very good reasons for not partaking in the research. If we've got the house for a year, that means a family doesn't have the house for a year. So that's fair enough. Often the institution was just too big. They have a process with voids, they have targets they have to meet, they have a retrofit policy already, and taking one of their units, because they're units, they're not homes anymore, out of that system is just a faff. And they've got to do 50 that month, and it's just annoying to have to kind of work out this one special one. Plus lots of contractual risk issues where we're going to burn it down, all of that sort of stuff. It's just outside their normal operations, which is understandable, but it was a surprise. Okay. I'm just going to talk about the case studies. There was laboratory work and some modelling work as well, which I won't touch on, but we'll just talk about that. So this is the co-heating test that I mentioned earlier. This is the thing that gives you that evaluation. What it means is we can see what the home was designed to improve by, how much it actually improved by. We can also compare what the EPC said to what it actually achieved, and some other modelling too. So that was it's quite a good test to be able to do. So these are some of the homes, and we did step by step. So we would do the loft and then test it. So we test it before we did anything, and then we do the loft and then we test it. And then we do, what did we do here? This was the base stage. We just test it as we found it. Then we put the loft in and then we test it again. Then we put the new floor insulation in and we test it again. Then we do the wall insulation and then we test it again. And then we did those bits that I talk about which join all the other bits together, and we test it again. Some homes we did other things, some homes we put windows in, yeah.
You talked about the floor insulation. You said it came out very high, expensive. I was quite surprised about that. Is that because you've got to take out all the kitchen? Is that all costed into it, or is it just assumed that that's just the measure itself?
Our costs were the total costs. In the reports, we split it all down into what we call the retrofit costs and then the enabling costs. So the question was, why was it so expensive? So a lot of the figures you get quoted are just the cost for doing the retrofit. But of course, there's other stuff too. You know, there's extra skips, or some of the homes we had roofs we had to fix leaks in, and and there was all the extra scaffolding up for a bit longer, or kitchens to remove, and plumbing to do, and electrics to change that aren't costed in the quotes you often get. And so what we've done is being able to identify where those costs differ from quotes, to be able to give government information to say you need to update your cost models to capture all of these extras. Because in some homes we were looking at, well, on average it was a quarter to a third extra cost on top. So if the government has committed £1 billion to retrofitting, are they including that extra cost? Does the householder have to spend that extra cost? Or does it mean only 750 million's worth of retrofit gets done? So it's useful information for them to update what their cost estimates are for policy. Thanks for the question. Okay, we didn't just do the whole house, we did individual walls and floors and ceilings, so we could work out where all the heat was going and how well each of the different things were that we did. And these little red dots on here, they're called heat flux plates. They can give you the U value of that wherever you stick it. Okay, so we did a lot of that, and again we could see, well, the insulation said it should have been this, but it actually was this. That's the idea. So you lose heat through your walls and your floors and stuff, and your fabric, we call it the fabric. You also lose heat through air movement, so drafts in your homes, essentially. So we measured the drafts before and after. Did it do what it should have done? Did it suddenly solve all the drafts, or did it make absolutely no difference to the drafts? So that was important. And then we did something, the other way you can lose heat in a home is through the junctions. So it's not through the plain wall, it's not through the cracks and the gaps. It's where the walls meet the walls and the walls meet the ceilings. You can't measure those, you have to model those, so we model those. Right, what did we actually find then? So this is about to show how much energy the house used from the beginning. And the dotted line is, the dots with the lines is our measurements, and the blocks are derived values. This is what it kind of should be. This is just to check that our measurements were okay. They were okay. Really all you're looking at here is that loft insulation did basically nothing. We couldn't measure a real difference. Improving the wall, improving this instance, we put new windows and new doors in, and again, it possibly did something, but with this little error bar here shows you that it's within the error of the test, so we couldn't actually measure it either. Same for the floor. We even measured it go up. I mean, it didn't. It's just because it's within the error of the test. So these things aren't making any kind of headway into the heat loss reductions in homes. We're just kind of messing around at the edges here. The only thing that just made a difference was solid wall insulation. So that's a really strong message to send to government, to just say solid wall insulation is a special case. It's so much more expensive and problematic than all of the other things, and yet we're obsessed with trying to do as much of the other stuff as possible. We need to just be focusing on solid walls if our goal is net zero, and that's a change from previous policies.
When you refer to external wall insulation, do you mean just the wall, or do you mean there was internal cladding or external cladding?
It could be either. In terms of performance, it just depends on how thick the insulation is, front or back. There are lots of other issues, but in terms of just actual heat loss, that's really the only. It doesn't matter which side of the wall you put it on.
Yeah, but the trouble with insulation in cavities, which is a lot of people that causes damp, doesn't it? And it's not designed, it wasn't built and designed to have it filled.
So this is a really good question, so thank you for asking. We didn't test any cavity walls, but I want to stick with the question because I think it's really important. There's so much information, misinformation, uncertainties and unknowns about all of these different things that you can do to homes. So in some homes, if it's installed in a certain way, or it's in a certain type of house, yeah. But not always, and probably not often. So that's really annoying for everyone because it doesn't really help. So there are some general guidelines which the general public don't know about when it is and isn't okay. There are certain standards that can be achieved which will ensure that you're guaranteed, which a lot of people don't know about. And so you've hit the nail on the head with exactly the problem. We're having the same thing with heat pumps now, we're having the same thing with solid floor insulation, solid wall insulation. Yeah, we're trying our best to get simple messages out, and we would love to do a cavity wall project, but this was a solid wall project.
Well, I've had problems with cavity wall, and it was because they pump it in and they don't necessarily pump it all the way up the top, so you get a thermal bridge at the top.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And sometimes they don't pump it in the middle, and there's a thermal bridge there.
And it's about quality and workmanship. You try and take that up to one of these guarantee organisations, and they might give you some mold resistant paint, and that's all they want to care about. So isn't it about that confidence issue that we're talking about?
And until 2 years ago, there was no insurance-backed guarantees for any retrofits, that even those that were funded by government. So if your installer went bust, government won't do anything. Now there is an insurance-backed guarantee, and every single retrofit that's funded has to be going through Trustmark as an insurance-backed guarantee, which has additional stipulations on top to make sure it's put in the right walls and it's put in those walls properly. But that adds costs. So you used to be able to insulate 1 million, and now you can only insulate 800,000 because it costs more to do it. So
I did look at cavity wall insulation, and somebody said to me that I ought to just check what it takes to actually take it out again afterwards. So I did, and I found out that all the people who do that were very, very busy.
Yeah, we've done it. We've taken them out. Yeah, sometimes it's soaking, sometimes it's fine. So it's part.
That.
Yeah. Sometimes there's nothing there, and there should have been. We've even found a bike wheel and some double glazing inside some cavities on one of our projects, which was interesting. That was a new. Right, wrapping up with some results. So we said we compared modelling to the measured, the EPCs. We found out that yes, of course, the EPCs aren't accurate. So your coloured bar, of course, doesn't give you the exact amount of energy you use. How could it? But we've identified some ways that can be improved. So that's a nice thing for government to know. This is the PAS 2035. This is the standard that we were just talking about. It costs more to do it properly. So there's costs and benefits, and really we're trying to push a risk-based approach for exactly the reasons that you've got just in this room. And government are now more scared of homes falling down and Daily Mail headlines than they are about trying to do as many walls insulated as they can on the cheap. That's really unpopular with lots of people who now have to spend more money to do the things, but I guess it's really popular for the consumer, and I guess consumer protection kind of trumps a lot of things here. So we've identified, to find the middle ground, we hope this is what we've done. The standard says all of these different things that you've got to do, and we've gone and tested them and think, well, do you really have to do that? Or do you really have to do that one? And now we've got a better understanding of actually, yeah, you had to do that one, definitely have to do that one, but you don't need to worry about that one. And that one might cost £7,000, and so you don't have to do that, which is an enormous benefit to industry. So we're really hoping that more of those guidelines can be put out there, so it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to do it properly, and we only do the things that are sensible. So we're trying to marry that balance of the two. We talked a little bit about this one. Everyone wants we're all going to get our EPCs up to a C, and if you're in a solid wall home, pretty much the only way you're going to do it is by insulating your walls. That's really actually an important point that we're hoping government will take more notice of. And you don't need to know. It's hard to measure. So even though we spent £3 million, we still have lots of concerns over the measurements that we took. So you might hear companies claiming, we'll save you 20% of your energy bill or 40% of your energy bill. firstly, they won't, because you now all know that solid wall insulation only saves you 18. Okay, so if anyone ever tries to sell you anything,
18, you say?
18% on the slide at the one at the beginning. You know, so wrapping your house in thick foam is only going to save you 18. So if anyone says they can paint your walls with some magic paint and it's going to save you 20-30%, you know they're lying, or at least they have been misled themselves. So, yeah, it's really hard to measure stuff, is what I found. Okay, we're releasing the results to this project, so you've all had an insight before government had even seen the results. So, good on you. It's going to be released in June, not July, as it says there, but in June. So we've got a big launch event at Headingley campus, which is really good.
Can I just, have you heard anything about this gap that's supposed to put into windows to stop the energy escaping?
Yep, so the question is about different types of double, I think this is for after, but yeah, I'll do it now. Double glazing is sometimes just used to come with air gap between the two panes of glass. Mm-hmm. You can put stuff in it to improve the heat retention. So yeah, you can get argon or different types of gas to go into window panes to make them more efficient. So
have you done any tests on that?
We haven't tested any of those. We did test part of this project, secondary glazing. You know secondary glazing?
Yeah.
Yeah. They worked almost as well as double glazing.
All right.
You just get that. It's fine.
So in relation to the double glazing you sort of thinking on, we need our rooms and our houses to breathe. We can't absolutely sort of trap everything in there. And of course they're putting in these trickle vents into windows all the time now.
Yes. Yeah.
And they seem to be getting bigger, and there seems to be regulations associated with it. Is there any government regulation that specifies the breathability within the house and how many these vents and pumped air should be?
Yeah, so it's called Part F of the building regulations for ventilation. So there's standards based on room sizes and different uses of rooms on how much ventilation should be provided, and some kind of maths equation of what that means in terms of the size of the vents. So what we talk about here by drafts is air coming up from the floorboards, coming down through the roof, behind the sink, you know, from where the toilets meet, you know, the floors. That's bad ventilation, essentially. That's where mice poo. That's where flies die and spiders live. You don't want that as your fresh air. So get rid of all of that. But you need to breathe. We all need to breathe, and we need to get rid of all that moisture we're all making in this room. So we turned the fan off this morning so you could hear this afternoon, so you could hear me. But the air quality in here must now be probably above the legal threshold for schools for CO2 because we don't have the fan going. Although it's not very well built, so we've actually got the So the idea is you have no insulation without ventilation, but that's purpose provided ventilation, not all the cracks and gaps. So you're supposed to insulate tight and ventilate right. They like it to rhyme because if it rhymes, people remember it. Evidently, I didn't. So, yeah, and it's a really serious issue, and the confusion around a breathable wall versus ventilation can be very profound and quite serious if designers don't understand it correctly. You know, we do have people dying in homes because of underventilation. And that's really significant. So we have people dying because they're cold, but also because we're not ventilating our homes. So if you have trickle vents in your home, you should be using them. They're there to keep you alive. But the problem is you don't know how much ventilation was happening anyway, and so you think, oh, well, it's a draft and I'll close it. And that might be fine if it's really windy and it's making a noise or it's temporary. You must always remember to open it. We have lots of social science researchers doing things around people cooking with pot lids off, drying their clothes on radiators because they've got nowhere else to dry them. And people will always say, well, I've got damp and I need my home to be insulated. And you go around and you monitor the air, the humidity that's being put into the air just by people breathing. And really that home just needed better ventilation. So it's a really difficult balance, ventilation versus retaining heat.
People don't like to ventilate because they think it's losing the heat in the house. So that big tenants and people What
block
good
it
for
up.
ventilation?
And it's understandable, yeah. And we understand. So what we try to do is work out, well, why do they do it? Is it just a misunderstanding of what happens, or is there genuinely a problem somewhere else that's causing them? Is there a lack of opportunity for them to do that, or do they actually have no money for their fuel bills? You know, so there's a whole range of reasons why this happens in people's homes.
I think they naturally think that they're spending more money on heating the house if it's going out through the it's going through the ventilation.
It's very difficult to get over.
It is, yeah. It's really, I'm one of
to
the
realise, because it just doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah. So as with lots of other areas, we make decisions that are technically bad for us, but there's very good reasons why we've made those decisions. So it's up to our social scientists and other places to look at those problems from the people's perspective to work out why they're doing it. And then we have the information to make better changes to their environment.
There are ventilation units which actually switch on and off depending on the humidity.
Yeah, that's
But they also have heat exchangers in them, so they suck out and then blow back.
Yeah.
And try and capture most of the heat that was lost when they were kicking it out.
Yeah, so
do they do any good?
Yeah, they can do it in a new build. So we tested it in this project as well, and the home was so leaky. You're trying to ventilate. So the idea is you take all the air out, you put it through a heat exchanger, and you pass it over new fresh air coming in. So your new fresh air is nice and warm, and the old stinky air just goes out. Problem we have is that only really works efficiently because you've got to have a motor in there to fan and pump the air in, and it costs you loads. They've got pipes everywhere, and you've got to have ducts coming down. If you've got such a leaky building anyway, you're just wasting your time because all the air's coming in anyway. Yeah. So they're working really well in new build homes. If the occupant, and it comes back to the occupant, wants it and understands it, because just close that, and because they've got that, it means their house is below the minimum threshold for natural ventilation according to building regulations, and this is their only means of fresh air. And they can just close it. And they've got to change the filter every 6 months or it gets blocked up. And if no one's told them how to do that, or they can't afford to do it, they haven't got a chance of doing that. The fan might be noisy, so they turn it on. So there are all of these great technologies, and some of them work really well if they're being used really well. And so, yeah, we're very nervous whenever there's a new technology that is super efficient but isn't robust. And I guess that's what that's one of the things we enjoy, the challenge of working out how to solve those problems. The end.
Well, thank you very much.